What I deemed to be the best in the most important non-conference game of the year is here in week 2 in Austin. Texas, LSU, and for me, it's about the traditions of the two programs. It's about the two conferences. It's about the two name brands. It's about the athletes on the field and the expectations for these two teams in 2019. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Here we are with a live LSU and Texas look. We got Steve Helwick on the line, graduate of the University of Texas, covered Texas football for 4 years there in Austin. You can also join his work on the Hustle Belt and also Underdog Dynasty. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. I really enjoyed this. I think this was one of the best week ones college football has given us recently. We had great finishes from the Nevada comeback to the Boise State comeback, the Georgia State upset, and then Oregon-Auburn just gave us an instant classic to finish the night. So I thought week one surpassed expectations considering the lack of ranked matchups. So week 2, we have a great LSU-Texas game. We have Clemson, Texas A&M, and a few other games on the slate that look really good. And I'm just excited for the start of this college football season.
Yeah, I've got to say, as I reviewed week 2 in the last couple of days, I'm disappointed by the number of decent games, but certainly it's made up by the magnitude of the matchup, specifically this one, Texas A&M, Clemson, Stanford, USC, and a couple other decent matchups. But week 2 doesn't bring us a whole lot. But again, I've rated this one to be the best and the most important non-conference game of the season here in 2019. Steve, let's start with Texas. A nice 31 or 38 point lead early with the shutout going. They give up a couple two meaningless touchdowns to Louisiana Tech, but Texas looked awfully sharp in week 1.
I think this is a game Texas fans have been waiting for decades, where they absolutely trounce a non-conference opponent from kickoff to the finish. They went 3 quarters shutting out Louisiana Tech. And this isn't a scrub team we're talking about. This isn't a San Jose State. This isn't a UTEP. This is Louisiana Tech, a team Skip Holtz has got to be a really respectful program in the CUSA. They have 5 straight bowl wins, and they had a lot of returning talent like quarterback Jamar Smith and cornerback Amik Robertson. So this was supposed to be a good team, even better than the Maryland teams Texas lost to in the past. And Texas absolutely crushed them from start to finish. I thought Sam Ehlinger did what we expected him to do in preseason. A lot of people have been high on him, and he definitely proved that with 28 for 38 performance and 4 touchdown passes, I think it was. So Sam Ehlinger did really good in the passing game and getting multiple guys involved. Colin Johnson, Devin Duvernay, and then a new guy who's coming into the receiving group, Brendan Eagles. He didn't really play much last year. That receiver trio looked really good in week 1, and Texas's offense, I said they dominated from start to finish, which is something Texas fans haven't seen in non-conference for a while. I think that offense looked really promising in the first game. The defense, too, replacing 8 starters, that looked like something that Texas's defense might struggle with and have growing pains with. But early in the season, they stopped Jamar Smith in that offense. Louisiana Tech wasn't going anywhere with the running game, and I think you have to credit Jeffrey McCulloch, the senior linebacker, who did a great job of stopping the run and making great hits throughout the game. You have to give credit to Caden Stearns, returning for a sophomore year from the safety position. Him and Brandon Jones, that's one of the best safety tandems in the nation, and they both delivered. I think McCulloch, Caden Stearns, and Brandon Jones were the 3 best defenders on the night, 3 best tacklers, and it's great to have that veteran presence leading Texas's defense. Now, I do see a comment on the screen, a little concerned because of the injury to Whittington. Yes, Jordan Whittington has been confirmed out from 4 to 6 weeks by Tom Herman. He's going to have sports hernia surgery, I believe, in Philadelphia right now. He was a player that was supposed to break out as a true freshman running back this year. Texas's running game's been concerning a little in the past, and they didn't do too much to alleviate those concerns against Louisiana Tech. Keontae Ingram had a fairly decent game. He said he was disappointed in his own performance after the game, but he still put up over 70 rushing yards on the Bulldogs defense.
Steve Helwick joining us to talk Texas football as the Longhorns get prepared for this huge monumental matchup that we have coming with LSU coming to town. Deep Arad is a guy that joins us on a regular basis here in the live chat, and he mentions all the time that Texas owns the series 8-1-1. I can't remember the last 2 times the teams played, but it's not significant, certainly, because these players know nothing of that. And this should just be a really good one with great athletes all over the place. So in addition to Whittington, we've got a question on the screen concerning Keontae Ingram. with a bone bruise, and the running back position a bit thin, as we discussed a number of times, Steve, throughout the offseason. Your thoughts about trying to run the ball against LSU and the status of the running back position?
Well, Daniel Young's going to be out too, and Kirk Johnson also has an injury. So that running back unit, it's beaten up right now. Keontae Ingram should still get to go by the LSU game. But you look at LSU's run defense, this is a really strong unit that, I mean, Georgia Southern was one of the best rushing teams in the nation last year. They finished 10-3, and their triple option offense just got stuffed by LSU throughout the game. They only put up 3 points and get a touchdown. And Texas doesn't run the ball like Georgia Southern does. So I think that could be the roughest part about Texas is they're going to have to be forced to pass throughout this game because LSU has a very good run defense. You saw what they did against Georgia Southern. You saw what they did against UCF last year in the bowl game, one of the best rushing teams in the league with Greg McCrae and Adrian Killins leading that unit. So Texas is really going to have to thrive on screen passes, I believe, to be their way of rushing in this game. Their screen passes were really good against Louisiana Tech. It seemed they'd get over 5 yards every time. Devin Duvernay, he really excelled in that. He had 9 receptions in the Louisiana Tech game. And I think that if Texas can use those screens as an alternate to running a lot of times, because I don't think you're going to get many yards just handing it up to the gut to Keontae Ingram every time with this defense has Kalevan Chasen in it, Grant Delpit, who's also a great tackler from the safety position. So Texas is going to have to find alternative styles in order to beat this LSU defense that only allowed 3 points to a team coming off a 10-win season last week.
Yeah, LSU and Texas, quite the matchup, of course, in Austin. And we've been looking forward to this one the entire offseason, and there should be athletic plays made all over the place. Georgia Southern, obviously, no contest for the LSU Tigers, 55-3 in that one. Steve, your thoughts about LSU possibly breaking out the offense, as we've discussed a number of times, having some issues with my setting of the shots here. But unfortunately, the LSU offense, Joe Brady comes in from the New Orleans Saints, and passing game coordinator there, Ed Ogeron, and the administration threw a ton of money at him, knowing, hey, we've got athletes all over the place. We've got the pieces in place, but we need to get away from the archaic offense that we've seen. I know Ed Ogeron has raved about what he's seen in spring and in summer drills out of the passing attack, and we saw glimpses of it against UCF in the Chick-fil-A Bowl when Joe Burrow threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. So this is kind of a different LSU offense of sorts that we will see Saturday night against Texas.
I cannot remember the LSU offense ever looking like this, even in the Matt Flynn National Championship days, just looking this sharp as they have in their last 2 games played. Joe Burrow looks like a quarterback reborn, and this goes back to last January when he played UCF, and it continues into the Georgia Southern game. Joe Burrow is currently leading the entire country, tied with Washington State's quarterback Anthony Gordon and Western Michigan's quarterback John Wasink with 5 touchdown passes. Burrow had an incredibly efficient game against Georgia Southern from the quarterback position, and that's been LSU's weak point for so long. It seems like LSU always has a star running back, star line, a star defense, and they suffer from the quarterback position. I mean, you think back to the Danny Etling days or just some of the other quarterbacks, even all the way back into Mettenberger. But Burrow had 278 yards. He only had 4 completions, which means he had more touchdowns than incompletions in that game. So LSU was scoring right away. Their offense is faster. They run shotgun more. They were running shotgun nearly every single play with a couple of pistol looks under Coach O. And I think this revitalized LSU's offense is going to work wonders for the team because LSU, since 2012, has been a team that's good and not great. I mean, last year was their first New Year's Six Bowl in the college football playoff era. Their defense was great the entire time. It was their offense holding them back. The last 2 times they played in Death Valley against Alabama, they got shut out. But with this offense that moves faster, involves more passing, Burrow's getting freedom to work downfield, and he was really good at that in the Georgia Southern game. I think LSU's offense has already taken the next step, and I think that's something that's going to be shown throughout the Tigers this year. And they really look dangerous in the SEC West right now, and dangerous going into this game against Texas, a team that I said earlier is missing 8 defensive starters from last year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Steve, Burrow just about flawless, 5 touchdowns, only 4 incompletions. I was interested to see the wide receiver distribution because this is a position where the recruiting has been off the charts good, just like any other position for LSU, but little productivity last year and little productivity coming back other than Justin Jefferson, who's a really good receiver. He's not elite, very good receiver, very capable, reliable, 5 catches, 87 yards last week. Terrace Marshall was a huge recruit in the 2018 class who caught about 15 passes last year, but he had 3 touchdown receptions in this game from short range. He's a red zone threat. And Derek Dillon, also a guy that was highly sought after, had a 32-yard reception in this one. Jamar Chase, a 5-star, 2 catches and a touchdown for LSU, is obviously 55-3 game. The passes were being thrown all over the field, different sets of players coming in. Obviously, in the second half, it was a complete runaway, so they could utilize all sorts of guys in the 30 receptions. Oh, my goodness. They must have had 12 or 14 players get involved. So, it's going to be a different LSU offense, obviously, that we see on Saturday. So, looking back at your preseason look at both of these teams, I'm sure nothing happened in week one to change what you thought, but they're both teams that sit behind established powers. They're established powers, but I mean established powers that have been dominant in the conference. Of course, we're speaking of Oklahoma that we saw last night, and then we see Alabama crush Duke over the weekend. So, what were your thoughts about either one of these teams or both of them seriously challenging the heavyweights in their division?
Well, I'm going to actually go back to the start of this question. I'd say that both teams actually did move the needle in week one on what I expected. I said they're facing good teams, Louisiana Tech and Georgia Southern. That's a great team from this USA. I said, won 5 straight bowl games. They show up every single December. They usually give SEC teams a hard time in the early weeks of the season, Louisiana Tech. And then Georgia Southern, that's a 10-win team from last year, a team that runs a triple option offense that many teams it's very hard to figure out. They only had 5 turnovers, I think, a year ago, or 5 fumbles a year ago, and LSU forced 2 in that game alone. LSU did a really good job of stopping them. So I think both of those teams moved the needle in week one, as there were some teams that actually did have question marks that were ahead of Texas, at least in the rankings, Michigan and Florida. So I think Texas should rise above both of those in the poll after that really good game against Louisiana Tech. But I don't know if these teams are exactly ready to challenge the Alabamas and Oklahomas of their conference yet. I did predict Texas to win the Big 12 preseason, but man, that Oklahoma game last night, watching Jalen Hurts and a Lincoln Riley offense, that's going to be tough for Texas to overcome throughout the season. I might be flipping on that pick soon because Oklahoma's offense and their defense in the first half, with Kenneth Murray leading the way against Houston last night, that was really impressive. In terms of LSU, I think LSU could potentially challenge in the SEC West this year. Going to Alabama and Tuscaloosa and knocking off the Crimson Tide is going to be tough. But the Crimson Tide did have some offensive struggles through the first quarter and the first half against Duke, only putting up 14 second quarter points against the Blue Devils, a team that's replacing a lot of guys from last year. So I thought that LSU really impressed week one with that Georgia Southern win, and I think they can go really far with their new revitalized offense that Ed O's running there with Joe Burrow at quarterback. Burrow looks like a completely reborn quarterback from what he did in the first 10, 11 games last year, and I'm excited to see where he can continue LSU's offense from there. And then LSU's defense, it's always good. It's always elite. Grant Delpit's leading the unit, and I definitely have a lot of stock in that unit right now.
Yeah, as we see mentioned on the screen right there by David, it's a situation where LSU most likely is the best secondary in the country. I certainly made that comment a number of times during the offseason, led by the guy that you just mentioned, Grant Delpit, who may not just be the best secondary player in college football, but may be the best defender in college football. Ed Ogeron certainly thinks so. LSU taking on Texas. I want to remind everyone out there, subscribe to the channel. If you have yet to dive into the videos, please do that first. And I think we'll convince you that we deliver discussion, debate, and analysis like nobody else with guys like Steve Helwake. You can join his work at Hustle Belt, Underdog Dynasty as well on SB Nation as he covers the MAC in the group of five. Also consider that Steve has been covering Texas football for the last 4 years. He's an alum. He was on the University of Texas television and campus cable station and worked for the Daily Texan covering Texas football. Loves it. I got to up my game, Steve. When you talk about watching 5 games at the same time with the 5 screens, I'm at 3. So I may lose my title as the voice of college football soon. So we need to keep that under wraps. LSU and Texas, was this your biggest non-conference game? It certainly was mine looking at the schedule for the entire non-conference season.
I'm trying to think of some of the others right now. Oregon-Auburn, it was a very good game. I actually had lower expectations for Auburn and didn't expect them to win that over Justin Herbert and Cristobal's offense coming back. But that was definitely a good game. Clemson, Texas A&M, that's definitely one you have to look for too, because the Aggies ended the last season on a high note, finishing 9-4 with that dominant, I think it was a 52-13 win over NC State. And Clemson won the national championship undefeated, and that was just a 2-point game last year. So it's kind of a revenge game for the Aggies going into Clemson, South Carolina for that game. But Texas LSU's also very special. These are two teams that very proud programs, but you weren't seeing them dominate in the CFP era. Neither of them had a 10-win season or had a New Year's Six appearance from 2014 to 2017. So the first 4 years of the CFP era, these programs weren't exactly what they were hoping for. But I think they both broke through at the end of last year. LSU had some impressive wins in the season. I said I was really high on the Tigers after that Fiesta Bowl win over UCF. And Texas, I was very high on the Longhorns after that win over Georgia. Both of these teams ended the season in probably the best way possible with winning these very prestigious bowl games, and then they get to meet in week 2 in Austin, Texas. And I think the fact that the game's in Austin, that makes the game even more hype, because LSU's favored in Austin. If the game's in Death Valley, I think LSU would probably be 7 to 10 point favorites over Texas, just because you see the SEC usually dominate in these non-conference games against these big opponents, like Auburn beat Oregon, and that happens a lot. So, but this year, I think it's anyone's game. It's a fair game in Austin. Texas and LSU both have a lot of strengths returning this year. Joe Burrow and Sam Ehlinger. It's a really good quarterback battle between quarterbacks that threw a lot of touchdowns and were very accurate in week 1. A little bit in the run game, but also both defenses looked incredible. Texas only allowed 14 fourth quarter points. LSU only allowed a field goal the entire game. So I think this is an even matchup throughout. And Tom Herman and Coach O, that's going to be a good one in DKR.
So I want to remind everyone, as you can see there on the screen, that we've got an offer out there along with our friends at betnow.eu and more so Volunteer Roadshow Bobby and his son's battle against cancer. This is for cancer research. Also, St. Jude's Hospital and a number of other YouTubers are involved in this project. So if you grab the link in the description section below, that's a link next to the hashtag SamStrong. Grab that link, go sign up right there at betnow.eu. You get 100% added to your account. So keep that in mind, that if you throw in $50, they give you an extra 50. You get $100. So to use football jargon, you're ahead of the sticks right out of the gate. And then obviously you could also trust me on my predictions. I'm not saying you can trust me. You can make that. You can make that decision to trust me. 14-10 against the spread would make you money. And that's what I did this past weekend with Notre Dame and Louisville tonight, of course. So you can grab my predictions by grabbing the link in the description section below as well, right under the other one, right next to Voice of College Football Community, and get your predictions from me on Notre Dame, Louisville, and week 2 coming up. I release those every Wednesday or Thursday. Got Steve Helwake on the line. You can join him on Hustle Belt and also on Underdog Dynasty. Unfortunately, we're having issues switching the camera shots for some reason for the first time. But, Steve, we appreciate you jumping on the line for Texas and LSU. Was there anything, and want to remind everyone in the live chat, I've passed along a number of questions and comments for Steve to attack and address. But if you have any more, I will certainly be checking out the live chat to get those on the screen and ask those of Steve, and I'll comment myself as well. Anything in week one that off the map, certainly Texas and LSU did not surprise us in a positive or negative way. But other than those two, as you look around college football in the Power Five specifically, but even the Group of Five, any surprises in regards to a different perspective on a conference or a particular team or program?
For a conference, I would say the Mountain West really surprised me, especially with their resiliency. I talked at the beginning of the show about how the Mountain West had the two biggest comebacks of the weekend. On Friday night, Nevada coming back down 17 against Purdue was 31-14, and they have the freshman kicker, true freshman walk-on, earn a scholarship on a 56-yard field goal, Brandon Talton. That was an excellent finish for the Mountain West, and that's I think they had 4 Power 5 wins. They had Arizona, Hawaii going back to week 0, and then you have Nevada beating Purdue. Boise State coming back down 18 to Florida State. And I don't know if anyone saw the Boise State-Florida State game, but that fumble that Boise State recovered to get the go-ahead touchdown, that was just a really impressive game that the Broncos had to overcome in Tallahassee. So I was really impressed with Brian Harson's team through that one. And then Wyoming to finish the night, staving off Kelly Bryant and the Mizzou Tigers. And Wyoming really dominated that game. Don't let the final score fool you. Wyoming was up a substantial amount in the second half. So I thought the Mountain West really surprised me week one. Other surprises, I know everyone's going to talk about Tennessee, Georgia State, which Georgia State's dominance over Tennessee kind of surprised me because Georgia State was 2-10 a year ago. This is a team where winning seasons are very scarce. It's a very new program. And I thought Sean Elliott's team did a great job of overcoming all the noise in Neyland Stadium with 100,000 fans and just collecting that $950,000 check and proving that maybe Georgia State could be a dark horse team in the Sun Belt this year. Just around the country and other areas. Stanford Northwestern, that was a game I watched a lot of. I knew it would be low scoring, but I didn't think it would be that ugly. And Stanford looks like they might be without KJ Costello for their week 2 game against USC. And I think the Cardinal could be a little concerning this year offensively because they didn't really establish anything in that Northwestern game. And one of their 2 touchdowns was basically a fumble recovery in the end zone at the very end of the game. So I thought Stanford and Northwestern were 2 teams that kind of disappointed me in week 1, even though I had very high excitement heading into that matchup.
Yeah, the Stanford score at the end of the game when they blindsided Hunter Johnson as Northwestern had a very minute possibility of coming back because there was about 25 seconds left in the game. They had the ball at their own 20 or 25-yard line, but still they had about 4 plays left in them. But the blindside for the strip sack and the touchdown obviously didn't affect the outcome of the game, but affected some of us in an adverse way that had Northwestern in 6.5 points. Steve is a guy that keeps track of the Big 12, of course. There's a comment on the screen from LSU fan speaking of the Big 12 defensively. He's stating Texas has the best defense in the Big 12. I certainly thought that they did in 2017. 2018, I thought Iowa State probably did. They certainly have the best talent on that side of the ball, but I want to see more out of TCU and Iowa State defensively. Your thoughts about the best defenses in the Big 12?
I'd have to go with either TCU or Texas on that one. I want to see TCU play a real opponent, not Arkansas Pine Bluff of the FCS. So I want to see TCU get stops against a team. I mean, we saw what they did in the Cheez-It Bowl last year. We saw what they did in a lot of their games last year, holding opponents to minimal points. And TCU's have very good defenses under Gary Patterson throughout the past couple of years. So I think the Horned Frogs are up there too. I just have to see them play a better opponent. And I have to check who TCU has on the schedule this week. One second. Horned Frogs play Purdue. Okay, they're going up against Rondale Moore, Elijah Sindelar. That Boilermakers team can score points. They have SMU the following week, so that should be a good measuring stick on how TCU's defense is. Another one, Oklahoma. Their offense scored so much last night that they gave Houston so many opportunities, and I think their defense actually performed pretty well in that game where they allowed 31 points to the Cougars. Alex Grinch really seemed to rework that defense. I said Kenneth Murray looked very good as a tackler the entire game. He was getting those wrap-ups. And then the secondary, I thought, with Oklahoma, they looked good for the most part. De'Ara King really waited until the second half to start tearing that unit up. So I think Oklahoma's defense has improved. I'm not ready to call them the best in the Big 12 yet, but I think Texas and TCU are definitely up there. Texas, teams cannot run the ball on Texas, and that's continued. Georgia struggled with that last year in the Sugar Bowl, and that carried over to week 1. So I think you have to give a lot of credit to the defensive coordinator, Todd Orlando. He was actually the coordinator that stopped Oklahoma last time Oklahoma played Houston, and he took his talents to Austin, and he's doing the same thing with Texas. That defense has really improved in the Tom Herman era.
To address David Greenshield's question on the screen concerning LSU's running game. So obviously Darius Geis, Leonard Fournette, Jeremy Hill, those guys elite. Last season, Nick Brissett just barely gained 1,000 yards, only about 4.3 yards per carry. It was LSU's worst rushing effort for a season by a single back, yards per carry, also by the entire team, yards per carry and total rushing yardage in quite some time. But they feel really good about not necessarily the guy coming back that gained the most yards, 45 yards and a touchdown, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's a good back, serviceable back, but not the elite level that you would expect at LSU. But this kid, you've got Chris Curry, only carried 2 times this week, but they got a couple of freshmen that they brought in as 2 of the top 4 running backs in the nation in John Emery and Tyler Davis as well, who carry 3 or 4 times each. It'll be interesting to see how they distribute the carries, because obviously at 55-3, they spread it all over the place. But they got 4 legit backs and these 2 stud freshmen in Davis and in Emery, who a lot is expected of. I cut a piece on LSU's running backs in the offseason and dug deep into watching these dudes play and getting the scouting reports, and they are the ceiling is high, and usually a running back can come in rather quickly and make an impact. So we'll see what the distribution is at the LSU running back position, but they certainly have a couple studs coming in to complement Edwards-Helaire.
Don't they? They still have Leonard Fournette also in that backfield.
They do.
He got a couple carries last week against Georgia Southern, so I expect him to be the secondary back for the Tigers going forward into this Texas game. I don't expect much rushing production out of either team. I think this game will go more through the air and rely on beating the secondaries. I think LSU has the advantage in the secondary, but then again, Texas, you have one of the best safety tandems in Caden Stearns and Brandon Jones, so the Longhorns are really good in zone coverage. And their cornerback, Jalen Green, actually looked really good against Louisiana Tech too. So going to the passing games, I think both teams could struggle a little bit just offensively. I don't expect either team to hit 30 in this game. Running the ball, that's just going to be very tough for both teams. These teams are 2 of the best at stuffing the run. They recruit really well on defense. They have really good defensive coordinators that develop the teams. So I don't expect much offense Saturday.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Nice Guy TV. I appreciate the contribution. Thank you so much for helping us build the channel here. Best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football right here each and every day with live streams, videos from myself. We bring on the very best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation, analysis from myself. So we thank you so much for the contribution. We've got the super chat on, so you can contribute there. Please like the videos as well. That helps the YouTube algorithms. Comment, share the videos, and of course, subscribe. And if you're coming across us for the first time, or maybe have only seen a little bit, dive into the videos. Don't subscribe. Look at the videos. See what we do on a daily basis. And I think you will want to lock in here for college football season. Steve, as you well know, it's the standard line that Vegas sets the line at 3 points for home field advantage. Now, that's a general principle. Obviously, the home field advantage at Tulane is different than the home field advantage at LSU, and so forth and so on. So there's a different varying of home field advantages. Well, the one in Austin would have to be in the top 10 or 15 in college football. And to know that Vegas has set a line of 4 points in LSU's favor going on the road at Austin, Texas having just defeated an SEC caliber champion, a team that took Alabama to the final 3 minutes of the game. And I know it's only one game, and there was question about motivation on Georgia's side, but LSU is a 4-point favorite at Texas. Are you a bit surprised by the line?
I'm not. I said earlier, LSU has a good – they do well in these non-conference games, with the exception of the Wisconsin 2016 opener. I'm just remembering LSU beating Oregon, beating Wisconsin in 2014, the Tigers beating Miami last year. The Tigers do a really good job against these ranked opponents early in the season. I think a little history goes into that line making too. Texas had that marquee win over Georgia last year, and I think people still want to see a little more out of the Longhorns just because of some of the inconsistencies they showed last season, losing games to West Virginia, Maryland, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, dropping 4 games a year ago. So LSU finished with a better record. You talked a lot about home field advantage, and I'll have to say, while I was in college, which was from the 2015 to 2018 season, I did not think the home field advantage at Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium was that great for Texas, but it finally seemed to come to fruition on the last home game of last year, which was against Iowa State. I had never seen the student section, the fans out in full force more than they were against Iowa State. There were a lot of games that were kind of empty-ish while I was there. One comes to mind is a 2017 game against Oklahoma State, which ended in overtime. It was I think Oklahoma State was 10th or 11th at the time, and that went to overtime, 13-10 game. But I'll have to say Texas has a real home field advantage now, and I think you have to thank AD Chris Del Conte. He came from TCU. He's one of the ones who really helped rebrand TCU into a national power, and he came to Texas a couple Decembers ago, and he has really done a great job of elevating that game day atmosphere in Austin. So this should probably be, I think this will be the most attended game in DKR history, surpassing, I think, last year's USC game. It was either last year's USC game or 2016 Notre Dame game set the record. But this should be the most attended game in history, and LSU will definitely hear the noise and feel it. It will feel like a Death Valley game there. I think everyone in Austin knows what's at stake in this game. There will be a ton of LSU fans. LSU fans travel really well. And this one, I mean, this is just going to be one of the best atmospheres in a regular season college football game that you can possibly get. In terms of the line, I think LSU by 3.5 is fair for right now out of what we've seen out of the teams in week 1 and how they finished last year. LSU just seemed to be slightly above Texas at the end of last season. And I think that's a fair line. I'm trying to think of how I'd bet on it right now. If I think LSU wins by a field goal or if I think they can win by more. I think 3.5 is a perfect line for this game.
Got Steve Helwick on the line. You can join his work at Underdog Dynasty, also at Hustle Belt, University of Texas alum who covered the Longhorns there with the Daily Texan and at the University campus cable station for 4 years, all over college football, top to bottom. We bring on Steve on a regular basis. So, Steve, in regards to the Texas and Big 12 expansion or retraction talk a few years ago was hot and heavy, of course, in the Big 12 came out and said that they were actually looking at it and surveying the field. We've got a question here from Navy Thomas just in regards to, I was surprised because that had cooled down and the Big 12 had done their studies, looked around the country and did their research and basically decided to stand pat. And I don't know that there were any good options for them out there. So I think it was a wise decision. But that was about 3 years ago. And then I was surprised to hear there just be some rumblings. I don't know if they were legitimate or they were founded anywhere real this past offseason about there being more thought about Texas moving on. I don't know if you've heard anything or you have any thoughts about what would happen to the league if there was more expansion or more retraction and where teams would go.
I like the thought of expansion a little bit, honestly. I thought 2016, I thought that was a perfect time to add Houston, maybe add another school to that, like a Memphis, which is kind of in Big 12 country there in Western Tennessee. So I kind of wanted the expansion talk to come to fruition because there's a lot of good teams that I really hate this Power 5 group of 5 divide because I've always said I don't believe it's on talent, it's on money. I mean, you look at how many teams from this group of 5 won on week 1. You see Memphis favorites against Ole Miss. They even cover the spread there in that game. There's a lot of good teams in the American and Mountain West. So I don't know. Texas shouldn't move, though. The Big 12, I think, is a top 3 conference with the SEC and Big 10. The ACC is pretty much just Clemson and then a bunch of good, not great teams. Syracuse is the only other ranked team in that conference right now. So the ACC isn't that deep at the top. And the Pac-12 is deep around that 20 to 25 level of the top 25. It feels like every single year. That's where you have your Oregon finished 9-4 last year. Stanford finished 9-4 last year. I think Washington finished, well, was it 10-4 last year? I think, and Washington State. There's just a lot of teams in the Pac-12. They always just beat each other, but Texas is in a good spot in the Big 12 right now. You have 10 teams. I think the Big 12 really likes that round robin conference play. So I think that's one of the reasons that they're not going to expand. And then I know the American just filed for a waiver to do it, but the Big 12 is currently the only conference that features the top 2 teams in the conference with no divisions in its conference championship game. So they're trying to add one extra marquee game to the end of the season. So I think the Big 12 is in a pretty good place right now. I would like to see expansion just to give teams like Houston, Memphis, UCF, Cincinnati, Boise State, teams like that deserve more respect, that always get criticized for strength of schedule, but these are good teams I feel like could compete in the Big 12. I'd love to see them compete in what a so-called power conference, but right now I think Texas is in good shape, Big 12 is in good shape, and I don't think any of that's going to change anytime soon, especially when you consider things in conference like the money distribution that comes from bowl games. Those 10 teams are splitting on it. It's hard to see those ADs approving more teams to join the conference, especially. So, and I don't see Texas moving. Pac-12 kind of has a bad reputation now as it looks on pace to miss the playoffs for its 17, 18, 9, 13, third straight year. Considering Oregon dropped that week 1 game, I think they're relying on Utah to carry them now, as Stanford and USC are currently operating with injured quarterbacks. So conference expansion, I don't really think that's a subject right now, but it's always an intriguing thing to talk about.
On the scale of overreaction versus standing pat and not recognizing change, I would be somewhere in the middle. I know on this Monday, following the likes of the Florida State collapse in the second half and Tennessee losing, as you mentioned, Will Muschamp and South Carolina losing to what has been, maybe not this year, but what has been an awful North Carolina team with 5 wins in the last 2 years. People are going crazy, running around, overreacting, trying to fire coaches. So I don't go off of the reaction of 1 week. Sure, those guys, especially Willie Taggart, considering what Florida State failed to do last year, he would be on the hot seat if I was running the show at Florida State. But I'm not firing Willie Taggart mid-season. Just pointing that out as an overreaction scale. I thought you did a nice job of running through what we saw out of the group of 5 in the Mountain West, in particular in week 1. That's a collection of games. And this goes on every year to a certain extent, where the top 10 to 15 teams in the group of 5 out of roughly 65 teams, there's about 65 in each of the Power 5 and the group of 5, can certainly play with and beat a majority of the Power 5 teams. So that's not the clear divide, certainly. And what they were able to accomplish this past weekend certainly speaks to giving that division of teams, that group of teams, the group of 5, more latitude, giving them more weight and recognition. If one of them is able to break free and stay undefeated, and give them a place at the table, certainly in this college football playoff business, because I just think we're seeing it too often for it to be dismissed as any kind of fluke. It's happening over and over against not lower tier. The Illinois and the Rutgers get throttled by the group of 5 on a fairly regular basis. It's happening now, like you mentioned, to Missouri and Stanford a couple years ago, and Arizona State last year, and on and on. And we're going to see Minnesota Fresno State Saturday night. That should be a decent game, although Fresno State not the team that they were last year. So certainly your mentioning and your stand in the group of 5 is being validated.
I do think the gap is kind of bridging, well, especially with the AAC and Mountain West. CUSA, MAC, and Sunbelt still have a long way to go, I feel like, but the Mountain West has a lot of good teams. In the American, Cincinnati beat UCLA by double digits. Probably should have been more, considering the Bearcats' turnovers in deep in Bruins territory, especially that interception Desmond Ridder threw right before halftime. Then you look at the Memphis Ole Miss game. That was probably a game that Memphis should have also won by more. Seemed like every possession they would punt at the Ole Miss 40-yard line. They finally got a safety at the end where they won 15-10. But the AAC, I think, the thing about these conferences, though, the Mountain West and the AAC, is they're top heavy, but the bottom is kind of bad. I know a lot of conferences are like that. With the Big Ten, they have Illinois and Rutgers at the bottom there. Because the AAC, you see what South Florida did against Wisconsin. They just put up 0 points, got dominated by Jonathan Taylor and company. And then UConn is a joke every year. They had the historically awful defense that allowed 50 points a game last year, and they're going to leave the conference soon. Then you kind of see some of the same thing in the Mountain West with teams like New Mexico at the bottom and San Jose State, who had 1 win last year. So these conferences do have kind of bad teams at the bottom, but the cream of the crop of these conferences, the top 5-6 teams, I'd put them against the top 5-6 teams of the ACC and expect a 500 record, honestly.
Yeah, I'd have to think that one over, but that seems pretty legit considering the plight of Florida State and Miami right now. That's the difference between the ACC being mediocre, as it currently is, very marginal. Poor showing last year out of the ACC, and the ACC being what we saw in 2016. So in 2016, they went 10-3 in the postseason, won a national championship, won a Rose Bowl. The likes of BC and Wake Forest were going out and beating comparably seeded teams in the other conferences during bowl play. But ever since the ACC has been awful. Memphis could beat Vandy. So I just wanted to address this particular comment because I see these comments made all the time about who could beat who. Okay, yes, Eli, I appreciate your contribution. You're on here all the time. Appreciate the statement right there. Always want you to contribute, but you understand you could write that Vandy could beat Memphis, and the statement is just as legitimate. There's about 75 to 80% of the teams in the country can beat the other 75 to 80% of the teams in the country. Now, if they play, I always try to ask myself if they played it 10 times, because we've seen Purdue beat Ohio State and Pitt beat a national championship Clemson team, and we could go on down the line. Anything can happen, almost anything on a given Saturday. But how did these teams stack up if they would play 10 times? But yes, Memphis could beat Vandy. Vandy could beat Memphis. It's a toss-up. The statement can be made either way. We got Steve Helwick on the line. You can join him on Hustle Belt, also on Underdog Dynasty to covering Group of 5 football there on SB Nation. And Steve joins us to talk Texas football and LSU. And why is Steve credentialed and why is he credible to talk Texas football? Texas alum, 4 years covering the program. Right there, up close and personal at all the games, writing for the Daily Texan and covering Texas football on the campus cable station. So we've always appreciated Steve's contributions here. And LSU and Texas, it should be star-studded. Is there anything that you saw out of either team in week 1 in regards to your rich background covering Texas, but also I know you watched the LSU game and know a lot about the Tigers in regards to maybe some players that jumped out at you that are going to be on our radar to watch this Saturday night?
I said for Texas earlier, you have to watch Devin Duvernay. I think he's going to be utilized a lot as a slot receiver in the screen games. You can see bubble screens with him, and I think Texas will be running those a lot of the time because they worked a lot against Louisiana Tech, and their receivers are really good blockers. And I think that Sam Ehlinger really excels at those quick throws. He can work out of the pocket, run around, and usually some guy will come up and try to pressure him, and that leaves somebody open on the screen. So I think that's a really good play with Ehlinger when you have a quarterback that's that mobile with his legs. And on LSU, I'd say that honestly, the guy that impressed me was Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, I mean, we thought he was just average SEC quarterback last year. I think he completed passes in the high 50 percentage, only threw about 16 touchdowns and 6 picks or something around that. He didn't have the best season, but just his finish to last year, the start to this year makes me think that he's going to be a great quarterback in the future. And LSU's revitalized offense, more shotgun, more throwing. LSU starting to look like Oklahoma State out here. And I'm really impressed by what LSU has done with a previously dormant offense. I see Holt's comment right now about what did I think about Sam Ehlinger's performance. I think he did what he needed to do through the air. I still wanted to see more of him on the ground game, but I don't think you really have to risk injury with rushing a lot on week 1 against Louisiana Tech, especially when your team's dominating. We saw Sam Ehlinger, I think he finished second last year behind Kelvin Hopkins of Army in rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks. So I think that Sam Ehlinger you'll see more running out of him against LSU. He will probably lead Texas in rushing maybe in the game because he's such a good goal line threat. Texas's offensive line does a good job of blocking for him by the goal line, and he just has that power and strength to get through. But that wasn't really necessary against Louisiana Tech considering the domination. You don't want to risk injury. You saw how many quarterbacks got hurt on runs this week. You look at KJ Costello from Stanford and Mitchell Guadagni from Toledo. So many quarterbacks got hurt on runs this week, so it's not the best time to risk it when you're shutting out Louisiana Tech late in the game. But as a passer, Sam Ehlinger did a fantastic job. All you could ask for him. Nearly threw for 300 yards, had 4 touchdown passes, no picks, 28 for 38, had a couple overthrows, but did a good job.
All right, we're talking LSU and we're talking Texas with Steve Helwick on the line from formerly the Daily Texan and University of Campus station there at Texas. And, of course, you can join him on Hustle Belt on SB Nation as well as the Underdog Dynasty. Certainly leave your comments and your questions. I've tried to survey as much as possible and serve it up for Steve as we break down LSU. This isn't going to be the only preview of LSU and Texas. We will talk up the big game all week, and I will certainly be around for the next few minutes to take your phone calls if you would like to join in at 860-325-3687. Any other hot takes on the game, Steve, before we let you go?
See, some hot takes on LSU Texas. I don't know what the over-under is, but I think the winner will have – I'm going to say it's going to be 24-20. I'll probably pick LSU as the winner. I know some Texas fans will be a little disappointed to hear that from me, but I do think that it's going to be a close game. Either team can win it. This is one of the things where, going back to Eli's Vanderbilt-Memphis comment earlier, that Memphis can beat Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt can beat Memphis. That's the same way with LSU and Texas. This game's just going to come down to something. Auburn, Oregon, I think it'll come down to one of the final possessions of the game. You'll see either Joe Burrow or Sam Ehlinger leading their team on a possession late in the game. And this one's going to be really close. It's going to be a classic, live up to the hype. I feel like when games are on ABC and the Saturday night and college game days at the campus, the games just always seem a little closer, a little more hyped, and they make every game feel like a bowl game or a national championship. I think ABC does a great job with this. This is actually the first college game day to come to Austin since 2009, the year after the Michael Crabtree play. So they went back to Texas Tech the very next year for Mike Leach, Mac Brown, Red Raiders, Longhorns matchup. So this will be the first time the game day atmosphere is there in a while. And I think that atmosphere starts at 8 a.m. Central Time, and it'll carry through over 12 hours into game time, and I think that always adds some more excitement into the game. But I do have the Tigers coming out on top just by a narrow amount, but it would not shock me if Texas overcame that and beat LSU. Texas has won all their really big non-conference games, it seems, in the past couple years in DKR. I know Notre Dame finished 4-8 in 2016, but they were ranked number 10 at the time. It felt like a big game at the time when Tyrone Swoops dove into the end zone, beat him in double overtime, 50-47. And then they had the USC game last year where they just dominated the Trojans. Then again, that Trojans team ended up being 5-7 in a major disappointment, missing out on a bowl game. But Texas does really well in these DKR games, which I'm almost getting talked into picking Texas, but I think I'll stick with LSU, a team that's more established that we've seen in the past. And I think their defense is more of a certainty than Texas is based on the amount of guys returning. So I'll go with the Tigers, but it should be a great game.
All right. Quite a breakdown on LSU, Texas. Just our first as we get going on week 2 of college football, courtesy Steve Helwick from Underdog Dynasty and Hustle Belt on SB Nation. So please join him right there as, again, give the group of 5 a look and give them their due. Check out the results and go by the results on the field. It's mighty impressive what we saw in week 1, especially from the Mountain West in particular. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes. Take your calls if you would like to make any concerning college football. Of course, 860-325-3687. And just released this morning I did my take on the Oklahoma performance, specifically Jalen Hurts against Houston. Wow. 3 incompletions, 6 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts on fire against a bad Houston defense, of course, but still tore him up 49-31. And then Bo Nix coming back in the second half to play much better football, especially in the final 5 minutes, and the 2 great throws that he made, and the 4th and 3 run to pull out the win over Oregon, and Auburn's just getting over the one hurdle of Oregon, and obviously the Auburn Tigers with one of the toughest schedules in college football. All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Yo, Mark, it's a deeper rod. How's it going?
I would have laid some serious money that call was coming from you.
Yes, probably right. I'm like one of your
I was right.
fans. I just love your videos.
I appreciate it.
I just wanted to not necessarily make a comment on the LSU game, but just kind of briefly bring up Houston OU yesterday. Personally speaking, I think from what I saw on the eye test, right, and you know me, like I'm a diehard Texas fan, diehard Texas alum, like I would support Texas till my deathbed, but it just looks like, OU looks like a very impressive team this year. Based on what I saw yesterday, I know it was Houston. I know Houston doesn't necessarily have the best defense in the world, but Jalen Hurts, man, he looked very impressive last night. And I think that he's going to kind of bring a handful for Big 12 defenses this year, particularly just the way that he's built. I think that he's a lot stronger than his Alabama days. He's put on a lot of weight. There were videos, I don't know if you saw any of those viral videos of him weightlifting, but he's like benching close to 600 pounds. It's going to be, I guess, what I would imagine another classic shootout between Texas and Oklahoma, probably twice this year. But I just wanted to say, man, like, Oklahoma looks very impressive offensively this year.
Yeah, it was one of those games that at a certain point in the game, you didn't know whether Oklahoma was legitimately giving up points and yardage, or they just knew they had the, well, at one point 35-10 lead. And so the defense had played extremely well out of the gate, the first 3 or 4 series in particular. So we'll see when they're facing somebody that's going to take them down to the last half of the final quarter, whether this defensive improvement is legit or not. But considering Alex Grinch and his track record, I got to think that the defense is improved and will be improved.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. It'll be interesting to see how they play against the elite Big 12 offenses this year, because they don't play anybody this year. They play UCLA, which is one of the worst teams in college football. I think probably right now, arguably the worst team or close to the worst team. You can argue maybe Tennessee or some of the other ones have a competition in that leg, but UCLA is pretty bad, and they play them next week. Aside from Texas, they don't really have anybody on their schedule. I mean, you can argue maybe Iowa State, maybe Oklahoma State, depending on how good they are, offensively this year. But Iowa State looked pretty dry this weekend. They almost lost to Northern Iowa. Now, I know it's very early and upsets happen all the time, but it looks like a 2-horse race right now in the Big 12. And I personally think that, it's going to come down to Texas and Oklahoma, and I think it's going to be a shootout between both teams. For us, I just wanted to kind of bring in, because the previous speaker he provided a bit of an injury update, but he didn't provide it in full. So I just have like a brief injury update I just wanted to give you. We do have a bunch of tailbacks that are out, but we do have, some good news in the sense that Jordan Whittington is projected to come back before we play Oklahoma on October 13th. He's out for about 6 weeks. So we do have a bye week in between there. And we also have like 4 games against slightly lesser ranked or lesser, quality opponents that one would traditionally consider after LSU. And then, it kind of looks like a tough slate, after after losing everybody. But Daniel Young is also projected to come back in 4 weeks as well. So we should have a full running back room in 3 to 4 weeks. But right now, when it matters the most, a bunch of inexperienced guys are going to be running that room, aside from Keontae Ingram, as I mentioned, because he's our best tailback. He has a year of experience already, and he's a highly recruited running back out of high school. But yeah, man, I mean, it's going to be a very interesting game, Texas LSU. It's probably going to set the precedence for the rest of the year. If we win, then that pretty much secures some sort of national spotlight for the rest of the year. But if we lose, then the season could crumble, and we could see another 3-4 loss season, which we're kind of accustomed to, or worse, over the past decade, as you're well aware.
Well, Deeper Rod, I don't know that there's any way Texas is going to lose this game. I'm thinking they win this game 38-21. I saw that score somewhere, and I just thought that seemed to be the right score.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit of an emotional prediction, because I'm not going to lie. Like, I would probably say that I do have a slight natural bias as a fan to go ahead and pick Texas. But I do, all bias aside, just based on what I see on the paper and looking at the depth chart from those teams, I do think that LSU has the edge on the defensive line. I think the secondaries are probably more or less the same. You could argue that Grant Delpit may be a little bit better than Brandon Jones and Caden Stearns and maybe B.J. Foster, but all three of these secondary guys who are starting for Texas are elite 5-star recruits. Brandon Jones is projected in potentially first round this year. He was the number 1 safety out of the class of 2017. So we do have a very good secondary, maybe slightly better from LSU because, they're known to be the school that has been producing a lot of DBs recently. And then you also got to look at the offense too, right? I mean, Joe Burrow versus Sam Ehlinger, I think that's going to be a good competition. But right now, just based on what the national consensus is that Sam Ehlinger is a slightly better quarterback than Joe Burrow. If only slightly, he's still a better quarterback based on what ESPN, Athlon, all of these other agencies have said. Could be a potential Heisman contender this year as well. Wide receivers, I mean, we got Colin Johnson. He's projected potentially first round as well. He looked very sharp if you saw some of those highlights in Louisiana Tech based on his catches. Devin Duvernay has the fastest 40 time in the Big 12. So I think that it's going to be a good game. I do think Texas has a better offensive line. It
should definitely be a good game. Deeper Route, we don't need the full-scale depth chart breakdown. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the breakdown, and sure. Certainly we'll be going live a number of times this week, so we will see you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. All right. Yes, we don't need the full breakdown analysis after we just talked about it for 45 minutes, so we appreciate it, Deeper Rot. So we also had a couple of others trying to get on the line there, so I try to get to them as soon as possible, but missed those calls. So if you tried to call in a second ago, please, yes, I enjoy the conversation, but when it's a rundown just aimlessly through the personnel that we've heard 55 times, we don't want to do that again. All right, everyone. So I'm going to wrap it up unless the two people that we're calling want to call back. 860-325-3687. I'm available for a few more minutes for any comments or questions. Don't see anything in the live chat in particular. Remember, subscribe if you have yet to do so. And if you haven't seen enough, certainly dive into the videos. And we do our best to provide the best in discussion, debate, and analysis. That's the aim. That's the aim, and we will do our best. And let's see, coming up, we will target the big games of the week. So I will produce previews on Stanford, USC, Ohio State, Cincinnati. We have, of course, this game. We've got Texas A&M, Clemson. I will preview that game as well. Of course, we've got our big Wednesday night with Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan added at 10 o'clock, not on a weekly basis necessarily, but Florida State at 7, Miami at 8, Ohio State at 9. And then at 10 o'clock Eastern time, we're talking Michigan football. And the Wolverines have a possibly tough game coming up against Army. All right. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? So what you need to do, whoever's on the line, shut down the volume in the background because you're on a delay. Hello? Okay. Somebody listening to me, which I appreciate, but they need to understand that the phone call is in real time, and what you're watching is about 10 seconds behind. So it's going to cause reverb, and you're going to be confused because you're going to be listening to me there and listening to me in real time, and there's going to be a 10-second delay between the two. All right, so I'll stay on the line again for a couple more minutes because there were two folks trying to get in, 860-325-3687. And again, I have mentioned this in recent days, is that I posted to the community on YouTube, and I don't know how that's displayed for you, but there's a community tab where I post updates, and so I delivered the live stream schedule and what that's going to look like the entire college football season. So that's going to be a Sunday live stream, typically at 11 a.m., possibly at noon Eastern time. That's going to be our big Wednesday night, 7, 8, 9 o'clock live streams. That's going to be Thursday late night after the games are completed. That's going to be Friday and Saturday throughout the college football season, throughout the day and into the prime time and late night windows on Friday and Saturday, covering college football with our instant analysis and taking your calls. So that's basically the live stream schedule. Again, I will post it on a regular basis. And also, you want to stay in touch with the notifications because, for example, I reached out to Steve. He was able to do it. I had about 2 hours notice. And so these updates are going to come when we are able to corral guests and set up live streams. So all these are going to be done in the past, recorded, but in the future, for this college football season, we're going to do these live because it's just a better forum because we can get you involved with your comments and questions, and then I can take some calls after the fact and after the guest has departed. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, after Notre Dame Louisville. And again, this is why it would be so nice to be doing this full-time all the time. I will be at work during the Notre Dame Louisville game, so there will be no pregame, halftime, postgame, anything like that for tonight's game. But obviously, all of the week one action will be in the books. Therefore, I will release my top 25 that actually makes sense. My top 25 that actually makes sense will be out sometime on Tuesday, as well as the Voice of College Football newsletter. So if you want to get on the newsletter list, all you need to do is send your email address to mine at markrogerstv@gmail. So send your email address to markrogerstv@gmail. We'll get you the newsletter each and every week. The facts, the stats, and the trends seem to be a popular section there that people really enjoyed. And we got a lot of great feedback on year one of the newsletter last college football season. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please share the videos, like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate it. And we will see you very soon. Look for those notifications for the next live stream. Otherwise, we'll see you Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. That's the next scheduled live stream as of right now for Florida State Seminoles Live.